Let's bring in Dana Perino now, co-anchor of America's Newsroom and co-host of The Five, and she is on set, not on the phone.
That was so confusing.
It is confusing. We're watching this motorcade pull out there, and at the end, when you saw the frustration from the reporters in the room saying, wait a second, only 6 or 7 reporters got questions and 21 are in the room. And not only that, he said he was late and had to leave, but they just pushed up the news conference 90 minutes from the 3 o'clock Eastern Time planned news conference. I don't know if you make anything of that.
Well, I think moving it up, you'd have to. It's curious, right? So, is it because the president wanted to be done with his day early? Look, I used to work for a president who liked to get things done early, and if you were not early, you were late. So, I get that, but that's not typical with this president. Right. It could be that they had enough agreement, and that everything that they needed to do in the meeting was done early. Okay, fine. He didn't take enough questions. You have to understand that these reporters, they've gone all the way over there. They're sitting there waiting. They have so many questions. And even though the answers might have been less than what Zelensky was wanting or that we were wanting, he was actually having a pretty good press conference. So to me, like, why not just keep going? Because there was enough hunger in the room that he could have continued to answer. He was pretty sharp. I have to tell you, I wouldn't have answered the question on the 2024 election the way he did. I would not have done that on foreign soil. I would have said, I'm honored to be the president of the United States. 2024 is a long way away. We'll talk about it then. Do you have a question about today's subject? I would never have done that on foreign soil.
You know, don't forget, Dana, that the longer he takes questions, the more the chances that one of them doesn't come out of it, the one answer doesn't come out of his mouth as
Always
it should. It was that famous press conference not too long ago where he started taking question after question after question and finally said, well, if it's a small incursion, that's one thing, and then boom. You know, the cat was out of the bag there, and I think that private conversations suddenly became very public. But in terms of this argument that has been made by the president's critics, that he doesn't seem to be playing to win here with Ukraine. What signal do you think he sent to Vladimir Putin and to Ukraine on that front?
Can I say that I don't think it was very different than what Vladimir Putin would have thought this morning? I mean, did Vladimir Putin need to hear from the president 20 times that NATO has never been as united? I think we all see that. That's a good thing. We are happy about that, but that's not new. I have to imagine that there has to be some sort of back channel communication to Zelensky so that he gets a little bit more. There were a couple of things he said that I think were worth it. One, and Putin would take notice of this, maybe he wouldn't be surprised, but the president was definitive that Putin and Russia should not be in the G20.
Yeah.
And, you know, Putin had built the economy to the point where he could be a part of the G20 and no more. And that, or at least if the other countries don't agree to it, the president said, well, then Ukraine should join as well, which basically effectively makes the G20 pointless. So I did think there was a little bit of news there, and he was quite definitive on that point.
Yeah, he said he was asked whether or not Russia needs to be removed from the G20. He said definitively yes. Personally, he believes that. Depends on the G20. Dana, on food shortages, another interesting moment. It's going to be real, said President Biden. And that's pretty much fact right now. There's going to be a major squeeze on a lot of global commodities. We talk about energy all the time, but when it comes to those grains that feed the world, it is going to be a real struggle.
So when I was on the phone with you and all of this changed, I mentioned that this is one of the issues I'm sure that they're going to talk about because there are real national security implications to hunger around the world. If you remember the Arab Spring, a lot of people might remember that and say, oh, that was about Twitter, right? No. The wheat prices had gone up so much, and there was so much frustration. When you have problems like food costs going up this much, you will have uprisings. Uprisings lead to what? Immigration and also famine and starvation. So it's not only the grain that's a huge problem, but also many farmers all around the world get their fertilizer from Russia and this area of the world. So our farmers are about to do their plantings in the next 4 weeks. If they don't get enough fertilizer, we're not going to have enough food here either. This is a very real problem. Apparently, the NATO has talked about it, and it is something that everyone has to think about, not just because there's a moral obligation to make sure people have enough food, but there's a national security implication as well.
So what about this non-red line that the president drew when it comes to chemical weapons? So the president said that it would trigger a response. The type of response would be measured by whatever the attack was. And then he said after that there would be a response in kind. I'm not sure that in kind were the words that he was actually looking for, because a chemical response in kind would be a chemical response. So, and we're not about to do that. So what did you make of what he said there?
Well, I understand that the White House has taken on board the criticism that the president has ruled out too many things that he will not do. Okay, and people are saying, why not leave a little bit more mystery? But then it does seem like, as you just described, the answer, it does seem a little bit more muddled. Well, if it's this, then it's that, but it could be, and we'll have to take into consideration, instead of just saying, we'll let you know, but we're on to you, right? You don't have to describe exactly what you're going to do, and you certainly shouldn't draw a red line if you're not going to adhere to it, as we saw in Syria back in 2014, excuse me.
So there was a lot of talk about what the president could do to change the current perception of the current sitting U.S. president on the world stage. I believe the Wall Street Journal wrote about this as we were working our way into the week, anticipating the president's arrival and visit there. Do you believe the president said or did anything on the global stage just now to change the way the world sees this president?
You know, I don't know. I think it's very good that he went. I think it's good that they had a face-to-face meeting, and a lot of the most important things in any meeting happen behind closed doors. So maybe we'll hear a little bit more about that. That was the first time he had a chance to meet the new Prime Minister of Japan, for example. That's a very important alliance. So now in this sort of post-COVID-ish world, the fact that he's there, the fact that he made these statements, I thought many of the answers were pretty sharp.
Yep.
And he seemed like he had energy, and so I would say net plus so far.
Interesting. Dana Perino's analysis. Thank you very much for joining us on set, Dana.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. John.
Thanks, Dana. We'll see you again soon.
Okay.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.